The afternoon sun was beating down hard when Maria stepped out of the yellow taxi. She stood there for a moment, just looking up at the massive building in front of her. The Grand Meridian Hotel stretched toward the sky like a glass and steel giant, its windows gleaming so bright they almost hurt to look at. She'd seen pictures of it before, of course. Her husband Richard had shown her dozens of photos when they were building it. But seeing it in person, that was something completely different. Maria adjusted the strap of her old travel bag on her shoulder. The bag had seen better days, that was for sure. The fabric was faded. One of the zippers didn't work properly anymore, and there was a coffee stain on the side that never quite came out no matter how many times she scrubbed it. But it was reliable, and that's what mattered to her. She didn't need fancy luggage. She needed things that worked. Her dress wasn't much to look at either, just a simple cotton sundress in pale blue, the kind you could pick up at any department store. It was comfortable for the long flight, and it had pockets, which in Maria's opinion made it perfect. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun because after 15 hours of traveling, there was no point in trying to look glamorous. Her face was free of makeup, and she could feel how tired her eyes looked. She didn't care, though. After 3 long weeks apart from Richard, all she wanted was to see his face and fall into his arms. He'd been so busy with business meetings and finalizing deals for 2 new hotels that they'd barely had time for proper phone calls. Just quick text messages here and there.
Miss you. Love you. Can't wait to see you.
She'd decided 2 days ago that she couldn't wait anymore. She'd booked a flight, planning to surprise him. He thought she was coming next week, but here she was, ready to see the look on his face when she walked in. The doorman at the entrance was wearing a uniform that probably cost more than Maria's entire outfit. He had white gloves, a tall hat, and the expression that seemed permanently stuck between bored and annoyed. When Maria walked toward the doors, he looked her up and down in a way that made her feel suddenly very aware of her wrinkled dress and scuffed shoes. He didn't say anything rude, but he didn't need to. The look said it all. Still, Maria smiled at him warmly. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice friendly despite his cold stare. He gave her the smallest nod possible and pulled open the door, but just barely, like he was doing her some huge favor. The inside of the hotel took her breath away. She'd expected it to be nice, but this was beyond anything she'd imagined. The lobby was enormous, with marble floors so shiny you could practically see your reflection in them. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, throwing little rainbows of light everywhere. There were velvet couches in deep burgundy, gold-framed mirrors on the walls, and fresh flower arrangements that were taller than she was. Everything smelled like expensive perfume and fresh lilies. Maria felt very small suddenly and very out of place. But she squared her shoulders and walked toward the front desk, her shoes making soft squeaking sounds on the polished floor. A few guests turned to look at her as she passed. She caught one woman in a designer suit whisper something to her friend, and they both glanced at Maria before quickly looking away. The reception desk was like something out of a movie, all gleaming dark wood and gold accents. Behind it stood 3 staff members in crisp uniforms. 2 were busy with guests, but one, a woman with her dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, was free. Her name tag said Susan Chen, reception manager. She was typing something on her computer and didn't look up when Maria approached. "Excuse me," Maria said politely. "Waiting." Susan held up one finger, the universal sign for wait, and kept typing for another 30 seconds. Finally, she looked up, and Maria saw her eyes do that same quick scan the doorman had done, up and down, taking in the cheap bag, the wrinkled dress, the tired face. Something shifted in Susan's expression. It went from professional neutrality to barely concealed disdain in about 2 seconds. "Yes?" Susan's voice was clipped, impatient. "Hi, I'd like a room, please," Maria said, keeping her tone warm and friendly. "I'm here to meet my husband." Susan didn't even touch her computer. Didn't check the system. Didn't ask for a name. Didn't do any of the things you'd expect someone at a hotel front desk to do. Instead, she just folded her hands on the counter and gave Maria a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm afraid we're fully booked," she said, each word carefully pronounced like she was talking to someone who might not understand English very well. Maria blinked. "Oh, are you sure? Could you maybe check? My husband owns this hotel, actually, so I'm sure there must be something available. His name is Richard Blackwood." The moment those words left her mouth, Maria saw something flicker across Susan's face. But it wasn't recognition or embarrassment or any of the things you'd expect. It was something else. Annoyance, maybe. Or disbelief. Susan let out a little laugh that sounded more like a scoff. "Right," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And I'm married to the president. Ma'am, we get this all the time. People come in here claiming to be related to celebrities, business owners, politicians, you name it. We're a prestigious establishment. We can't just give out rooms to everyone who walks in with a story." Maria felt her stomach drop. This wasn't going how she'd imagined at all. "No, really, I'm not making this up. I'm Maria Blackwood. I can show you my ID, I can call my husband right now and he'll confirm everything." But Susan was already shaking her head, that fake smile still plastered on her face. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. As I said, we're fully booked, and I have actual guests to attend to." She emphasized the word actual in a way that made it clear she didn't consider Maria a real guest at all. "But I just need you to check," Maria tried again, reaching for her purse to get her ID. "I have identification. I can prove who I am, ma'am." Susan's voice got louder now, and Maria noticed that other people in the lobby were starting to turn and look. "I don't need to see anything. I can tell just by looking that this hotel is not within your budget. There are several affordable motels about 10 minutes down the street. I suggest you try there." The words hit Maria like a slap. Not within her budget. Just by looking. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, felt her hands start to shake a little. It had been a long time since anyone had treated her like this, talked to her like she was less than human, like she didn't matter because of how she looked. One of the other receptionists, a younger man, glanced over with curiosity. Susan caught his look and raised her voice even more, clearly wanting everyone to hear. "We have standards here," Susan announced, loud enough that several nearby guests stopped their conversations to watch. "This is a 5-star establishment. We can't have just anyone walking in off the street making up stories about being connected to the ownership." Maria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't give this woman the satisfaction. "I'm not making anything up," she said quietly, but her voice was shaking now. "Please just call my husband. Just make one phone call." Susan crossed her arms over her chest. "I'm not calling anyone. What I'm going to do is call security if you don't leave voluntarily right now. This is your last warning." Maria stood there frozen, unable to believe this was really happening. She'd flown for 15 hours. She was tired and jet-lagged, and all she'd wanted was to surprise her husband and maybe take a hot shower and fall asleep in a comfortable bed. Instead, she was being accused of being a liar and a con artist in front of a lobby full of strangers. "Please," she said one more time, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please just check your system. Check the name Maria Blackwood. I'm telling you the truth." But Susan was already reaching for the phone on her desk, her eyes hard and cold. "Security to the front desk," she said into the receiver. "We have a situation." Maria's heart sank as she watched 2 large men in dark suits start walking toward the front desk, their expressions serious and alert. This couldn't be happening. This really couldn't be happening, but it was. The 2 security guards arrived faster than Maria expected. They were both tall, broad-shouldered men who looked like they spent every free moment at the gym. Their dark suits were immaculate, their expressions blank and professional. But there was something in their eyes, something that made Maria's stomach twist with anxiety. They looked at her the same way Susan had, like she was a problem to be dealt with, not a person to be helped. "This woman is refusing to leave the premises," Susan said to them, her voice crisp and businesslike. She said it like she was reporting a crime, like Maria had done something terrible instead of just asking for a room. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," the first guard said. He was the taller of the 2, with a shaved head and a scar above his left eyebrow. His voice wasn't unkind, but it wasn't friendly either. It was the voice of someone doing a job, following orders, not thinking too much about the person on the receiving end. "Wait, please," Maria said, holding up her hands. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'm not causing trouble. I just need someone to verify who I am. My husband is Richard Blackwood. He owns this hotel. If you just let me make one phone call." "Ma'am," the second guard interrupted. He was shorter but wider, with thick K arms and a neck that looked like a tree trunk. "We've heard every story in the book. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just come with us quietly and we can avoid any further scene." A scene. That's what this was becoming. Maria could feel eyes on her from every direction now. The lobby had been busy before, but now it felt like everyone had stopped what they were doing just to watch her humiliation unfold. A couple in matching designer tracksuits stood by the elevator, staring openly. A businessman with a leather briefcase had paused mid-step, his phone forgotten in his hand. A family with 2 small children had turned around completely, the parents watching with expressions that mixed curiosity with judgment. "I'm not making a scene," Maria said, hating how her voice cracked on the words. "I'm just trying to explain that there's been a mistake." "The only mistake," Susan said from behind the desk, her voice ringing out across the marble lobby, "was you thinking you could walk in here and con your way into a free room? We take fraud very seriously at the Grand Meridian." Fraud. The word echoed in Maria's ears. She'd been called many things in her life, but never a fraud. Never a criminal. Heat flooded her face and she could feel her hands trembling. "I'm not trying to con anyone," she said, but her voice came out weak, defeated. She reached into her purse for her phone, thinking if she could just call Richard, just get him on the line, this would all be over in seconds. Her fingers fumbled with the zipper, shaking so badly she could barely grip it. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us now," the first guard said, and this time his hand moved to her elbow, gripping it firmly. Not painfully, but definitely not gently either. "No, wait, I just need to get my phone," Maria protested, still struggling with her purse. But the second guard had taken her other elbow now, and they were steering her away from the desk toward the entrance. "Please, just give me 1 second. Her purse slipped from her hands. Everything inside went scattering across the polished marble floor. Her wallet, a packet of tissues, her reading glasses, some loose change, and her phone. The phone skittered across the floor, sliding at least 10 feet before coming to rest near a potted palm tree. "My phone," Maria said, trying to pull away from the guards to go get it, but their grips tightened. "Leave it," the first guard said. "Someone will collect your belongings and you can pick them up at the security office." "But I need it now," Maria insisted, her voice rising with desperation. "I need to call my husband. Please, just let me get my phone." The second guard looked down at the scattered contents of her purse with something like disgust, like her belongings were trash that had dirtied his beautiful lobby. "We'll take care of it," he said, but his tone made it clear he had no intention of doing anything helpful. They were moving her toward the doors now, and Maria couldn't believe this was actually happening. People were taking out their phones. She could see them lifting them up, pointing them in her direction, recording her, recording this moment of complete humiliation. Tomorrow she'd probably be on social media. Some viral video about a crazy woman getting kicked out of a fancy hotel. The thought made her feel sick. "This is wrong," she said, and now she couldn't stop the tears anymore. They started rolling down her cheeks hot and fast. "This is so wrong. You don't understand." "Save it for security, ma'am," the first guard said, and there was something almost bored in his voice now, like he'd heard it all before and nothing could surprise him. A woman in a white designer pantsuit and enough diamonds to pay for a car watched them pass. She had one of those faces that had clearly seen a lot of plastic surgery, all smooth and tight and oddly expressionless. But her eyes were alive with judgment and what looked almost like enjoyment. Like watching someone else suffer was entertainment. "The nerve," the woman said to her companion, a man in an expensive watch and Italian shoes. She said it loud enough that everyone nearby could hear. "These people think they can just walk into places like this and pretend to belong. No shame at all." Her words were like daggers, each one finding its mark. Maria wanted to scream at her, wanted to tell her that she had no idea what she was talking about, that making assumptions about people based on their clothes and their luggage was cruel and wrong. But the words wouldn't come. All she could do was cry. They were at the revolving doors now. The same doorman from before was standing there, and if he felt any sympathy for what was happening, his face didn't show it. He just pulled open the door, ready to send her out onto the street like yesterday's garbage. "Please," Maria tried one more time, her voice barely audible over her tears. "Please, I'm telling you the truth. My name is Maria Blackwood. I'm married to Richard Blackwood. This hotel belongs to my husband. I've done nothing wrong except look tired and wear cheap clothes." "Is that really a crime?" But the guards weren't listening. Or maybe they were listening and just didn't care. Either way, they kept pushing her forward, through the doors, toward the exit and the hot afternoon sun beyond. The lobby behind her buzzed with conversation. People were talking about what they just witnessed, forming opinions, making judgments about a woman they didn't know, and a situation they didn't understand. Some probably felt bad for her, but others, like the woman in white, seemed to take satisfaction in seeing someone put in their place, reminded of where they belonged in the world's harsh hierarchy. Susan stood behind her desk with her arms crossed, watching the whole thing with an expression of smug satisfaction. She'd protected her hotel. She'd kept the riffraff out. She'd done her job, or at least that's what she thought. In her mind, she was probably already imagining the commendation she'd get, the praise from management for being so vigilant, so protective of the hotel's reputation. The younger receptionist who'd glanced over earlier looked uncomfortable now. He shifted from foot to foot like he wanted to say something but didn't quite dare. Maybe he had doubts. Maybe something about the whole situation felt wrong to him. But he stayed quiet, and Maria was pushed another step closer to the exit. Someone in the crowd laughed. Actually laughed. Maria heard it clearly. A sharp bark of amusement like this was all some kind of comedy show put on for their entertainment. The sound cut through her like glass. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Her legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. The jet lag, the shock, the humiliation, all of it was crashing down on her at once. "Almost there." "Ma'am," the second guard said, and he actually sounded relieved, like he'd be glad to be done with this unpleasant task and get back to his normal duties. They were 2 steps from the door when Maria saw something that made her heart skip. A black town car was pulling up to the entrance. She knew that car. She'd ridden in it 100 times. It was Richard's car, the one the company provided for him. Her husband was here. "Wait," she gasped, trying to stop, trying to turn around. "That's my husband's car. He's here. He's right there." The guards didn't even look. "Ma'am, please stop struggling," the first one said, tightening his grip on her arm. "No, you don't understand," Maria said, her voice breaking with a mixture of relief and desperation. "He's here. My husband is here. He can explain everything." But they were still moving her forward, still trying to get her out the door, and Maria felt a scream building in her throat. She'd been patient. She'd been polite. She'd tried to explain, and none of it had mattered. These people had looked at her clothes, her bag, her tired face, and they'd decided she was nobody. They'd decided she was lying. They'd decided she didn't deserve basic human dignity or even the benefit of the doubt. The car door opened. Maria saw a polished black shoe step out onto the pavement, then a hand gripping the doorframe, then a familiar figure standing up, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. "Richard." "Let me go," Maria said to the guards, pulling against their grip. "That's my husband. Right there. That's Richard Blackwood." Finally they looked, and Maria saw something flicker across their faces. Uncertainty, maybe? Or was it recognition? Did they know who Richard was? Did they understand what a massive mistake they were making? But it was too late for any of that now. The doors were opening and Richard was walking in, and his eyes were scanning the lobby the way they always did, taking everything in at once. And then his gaze landed on his wife being manhandled by 2 security guards, her face streaked with tears, her belongings scattered across his hotel lobby, a crowd of people watching and recording like she was some kind of circus attraction. Maria saw the exact moment when Richard understood what was happening. His expression went from confused to shocked to absolutely furious in the space of about 3 seconds. His jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists at his sides. His eyes went cold and hard in a way Maria had only seen a handful of times, and never directed at her. He moved fast for a man his size, crossing the distance between the door and the security guards in just a few long strides. And when he spoke, his voice cut through the lobby chatter like a knife through butter, sharp and cold and absolutely terrifying. "Take your hands off my wife. Right now." The entire lobby went silent. Not just quiet, but completely, absolutely silent. The kind of silence where you could hear your own heartbeat, where every breath seemed too loud. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every phone was lowered. Every eye turned to look at the man who'd just walked in and spoken with such cold authority that it made the air feel heavy. The 2 security guards froze. Their hands were still on Maria's arms, but their grips had gone slack with shock. They stared at Richard like they'd just seen a ghost, their faces draining of color. "Mr. Blackwood," the first guard stammered, finally finding his voice. His hand dropped from Maria's arm like he'd just realized he was touching hot metal. "We didn't know, sir." We were just following orders from reception. I don't care whose orders you were following, Richard said, and his voice was still that same ice-cold tone that made Maria shiver despite the warm lobby. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to yell. There was something far more frightening about the controlled fury in his quiet words. I asked you a question. Why were your hands on my wife? The second guard had released Maria too now, both of them stepping back like she'd suddenly become radioactive. Sir, we apologize. We had no idea she was Mrs. Blackwood. We were told she was trying to scam the hotel. Richard's eyes narrowed. Scam the hotel, he repeated slowly like he was tasting each word and finding them all bitter. My wife flew 15 hours to surprise me, walked into my hotel tired and jet-lagged, and instead of being treated with basic human decency, she was accused of being a scammer and physically removed from the building. He moved to Maria's side, and his whole demeanor changed the moment he touched her. All that cold fury melted away, replaced by gentle concern. He cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. Are you okay? He asked softly, and Maria could hear the worry beneath the anger in his voice. Did they hurt you? Maria shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She wasn't hurt physically, but emotionally, that was a different story. She felt humiliated, degraded, reduced to something less than human, all because of a cotton dress and an old travel bag. Richard pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Maria buried her face in his chest. She could feel him trembling slightly, could sense the rage still simmering just beneath his calm exterior. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head and whispered, I'm so sorry. This never should have happened. Then he looked up, his eyes scanning the lobby, and Maria felt him go rigid again. She turned in his arms to see what he was looking at. Her phone was still lying on the floor near the potted palm, along with the rest of her belongings. And Susan was still standing behind the reception desk, but now she looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Richard's voice rang out across the lobby, loud and clear. Would someone like to explain to me why my wife's belongings are scattered across the floor like trash? Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The younger receptionist looked like he might cry. The businessman with the briefcase suddenly became very interested in his shoes. The family with the kids had already snuck away to the elevators. You, Richard said, pointing at Susan. Step out from behind that desk. Susan's face had gone from pale to gray. She looked like she might faint or throw up or both. But she didn't move. Now, Richard added, and there was no mistaking the command in that single word. Susan came out from behind the desk on shaky legs. She tried to smooth down her uniform, tried to compose herself, but her hands were trembling so badly she could barely manage it. She walked toward Richard and Maria like she was walking toward her own execution. Richard's arm was still around Maria, holding her close, protective. But his eyes were fixed on Susan with an intensity that would have made most people run in the opposite direction. What's your name? He asked. Susan Chen, sir. I'm the reception manager. Her voice came out small and thin, nothing like the confident, disdainful tone she'd used with Maria just minutes ago. Susan Chen, Richard repeated. Would you care to explain why my wife, Maria Blackwood, was denied a room in my hotel? Susan opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She looked like a fish gasping for air. I didn't realize. She didn't look like what? Richard interrupted, his voice sharp. Finish that sentence, Susan. Susan's eyes darted around the lobby, looking for help that wasn't coming, for an escape route that didn't exist. I thought she was trying to con us, sir. We get people sometimes who claim to know the owners, who make up stories to get free rooms. I was protecting the hotel's interests. Protecting the hotel's interests, Richard said, and he let out a laugh that held no humor whatsoever. By treating people like garbage based on how they're dressed? By assuming that anyone who doesn't look wealthy enough is automatically a criminal? That's how you protect this hotel's interests? I made a mistake, Susan said quickly. I'm very sorry, Mrs. Blackwood. She turned to Maria, and there was genuine fear in her eyes now. But Maria noticed something else too. The apology was directed at her, but Susan's eyes kept darting back to Richard. She wasn't sorry for hurting Maria. She was sorry for getting caught, sorry for making a mistake that put her job at risk. Did you even check the system? Richard asked. Did you type in her name? Did you ask for identification? Did you do any of the basic things you're trained to do? Susan's silence was answer enough. You took one look at her. Richard continued, his voice getting louder now. And you decided she wasn't good enough for this hotel. You decided, based purely on her appearance, that she was a liar and a con artist. And then you called security to have her physically removed. I was wrong, Susan said, and now there were tears in her eyes too. But they looked like tears of panic rather than remorse. I apologize, Mr. Blackwood, it won't happen again. You're right about that, Richard said coldly. It won't happen again, because you no longer work here. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Susan's face crumpled. Please, she whispered. Please, Mr. Blackwood, I have 2 kids at home. I need this job. I made one mistake. One mistake? Richard's voice rose. You humiliated my wife in front of a lobby full of people. You had her physically removed by security. You refused to even check if she was telling the truth. You judged her entirely on her appearance and treated her like she was worthless. That's not one mistake, Susan. That's a series of deliberate choices that reveal exactly who you are and what you value. Maria felt a pang of sympathy, despite everything. She knew what it was like to need a job, to worry about supporting your kids. But she also knew that what Susan had done wasn't just a simple mistake. It was cruelty, plain and simple. Richard, Maria said softly, touching his arm. He looked down at her and she saw his expression soften slightly. Can we maybe talk about this privately? But Richard shook his head. No. This needs to be public because what happened to you was public. Everyone in this lobby watched you be humiliated. They need to see that there are consequences for treating people this way. He turned to address the crowd that was still watching, still recording. My wife, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the lobby, is Maria Blackwood. She was a nurse for 15 years before we met. She still volunteers at free clinics every week. She's donated more money to charity than most people will see in their entire lives. She's funded hospitals, schools, homeless shelters. She's one of the kindest, most genuine people I've ever known. Maria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She didn't like being in the spotlight like this. Didn't like having her good deeds broadcast for everyone to hear. She'd always believed that charity should be private. That you helped people because it was right, not because you wanted recognition. And today, Richard continued, she was treated like garbage because she was wearing a cotton dress instead of designer clothes. Because she had an old travel bag instead of expensive luggage. Because she looked tired after a long flight instead of perfect and polished. He looked around the lobby, making eye contact with the people who were watching. Some of them had the grace to look ashamed. The woman in the white pantsuit who'd made that comment about these people was suddenly very interested in her phone. Her face red. How many of you judged her? Richard asked. How many of you looked at her and made assumptions? How many of you thought, even for a second, that she didn't belong here? The silence was deafening. Nobody answered, but the truth was written on their faces. That's what I thought, Richard said. This hotel, every hotel I own, is built on a principle of hospitality. Do you know what hospitality means? It means welcoming people, all people, not just the ones who look wealthy or important. Everyone who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. He turned back to Susan, who was crying openly now. You're fired, effective immediately. Pack your things and leave. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay, which is more than generous considering what you did. Please, Susan begged. I'll do better. I'll change. Just give me another chance. Why should I? Richard asked. So you can treat the next person who doesn't meet your standards the same way? So you can continue to judge people based on superficial appearances? No. This hotel, this company has no place for people like you. A man in a suit had appeared, hurrying across the lobby. He was older, with gray hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of years in management. He reached them slightly out of breath, his face pale. Though with worry, Mr. Blackwood, he said, I'm Gregory Wells, the general manager. I just heard what happened. I can't apologize enough. This is absolutely unacceptable and does not reflect the standards of the Grand Meridian. Richard looked at him with those same cold eyes. Where were you when my wife was being dragged through your lobby, Gregory? I was in a meeting upstairs. As soon as I heard, I came immediately. Gregory looked at Maria with what seemed like genuine remorse. Mrs. Blackwood, I am deeply, truly sorry. There is no excuse for how you were treated. You're right, Richard said. There is no excuse. Susan is fired. Those 2 security guards who put their hands on my wife are also fired. And I want a complete overhaul of your staff training procedures. Clearly there's a fundamental problem with how your employees are approaching customer service. Yes, sir, Gregory said quickly. Absolutely. I'll implement new training immediately. This will never happen again. It better not, Richard said, because if I hear about anything like this happening at any of my properties, there will be serious consequences. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Completely. Richard looked at the security guards, who were still standing nearby looking like they wished the earth would swallow them. You two? You put your hands on my wife. You dragged her through my lobby. What do you have to say for yourselves? The first guard stepped forward. We're sorry, Mr. Blackwood, we were just doing our jobs. We didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask, Richard said. You didn't know because you made the same assumption Susan did. You looked at her and decided she wasn't worth your time or respect. The guard opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. There was nothing he could say that would make this better. Clean out your lockers, Richard said. Both of you. You're done here. Maria watched it all unfold, feeling strange and disconnected from the whole scene. Part of her felt vindicated, seeing the people who'd treated her so badly facing consequences. But another part of her just felt tired and sad. Sad that this was necessary. Sad that people still judged each other so harshly based on appearances. Sad that cruelty was so casual, so easy, so automatic. Richard bent down and started collecting Maria's scattered belongings from the floor himself. The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar hotel empire, wearing a suit that cost thousands of dollars, kneeling on the marble floor to pick up his wife's wallet and tissues and loose change. Several people rushed forward to help, including Gregory, the general manager, but Richard waved them off. I've got it, he said firmly. When he reached Maria's phone, he picked it up and checked it for damage before handing it to her. Are you sure you're okay? He asked again, his voice soft now, meant only for her. I'm okay, Maria said, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. She was shaken, hurt, embarrassed, but she was also relieved that he was here, that this nightmare was finally over. Richard stood up with her bag and helped her reorganize her belongings, his movements gentle and careful. Then he put his arm around her shoulders and addressed the crowd one more time. I want everyone here to understand something, he said. This isn't just about my wife. This is about how we treat all people, especially those who might be vulnerable or in need. My wife is fortunate because I was here to defend her. But what about the people who don't have someone to stand up for them? What about the single mother who saves up all year to bring her kids somewhere special? What about the elderly person on a fixed income? What about the young person who's dressed casually because they just don't know any better? He paused, letting his words sink in. Maria could see people in the crowd shifting uncomfortably, and she hoped that meant his message was hitting home. If you work in hospitality in any capacity, your job is to make people feel welcome, all people. Not just the wealthy ones, not just the ones who look important, everyone, because you never know what someone's story is. You never know what they're going through. And frankly, it shouldn't matter. Human decency isn't something you should have to earn by looking a certain way or carrying the right brand of luggage. The woman in white who'd made that cruel comment earlier had tears running down her face now. She stepped forward, hesitant. Mrs. Blackwood, she said, her voice shaking. I'm so sorry. I said something terrible and I didn't even know you. I had no right to judge you. Maria looked at her, this stranger who'd added to her humiliation without a second thought. She could have been angry. She had every right to be angry. But looking at the woman's face, seeing genuine remorse there, she felt the anger drain away. Thank you for apologizing, Maria said quietly. I hope you'll think twice before making assumptions about people in the future. The woman nodded, wiping at her eyes. I will, I promise I will. Others came forward too. The businessman with the briefcase, a young couple who'd been taking photos, a woman with her teenage daughter. One by one, they apologized for watching, for judging, for not speaking up. It was awkward and uncomfortable, but it was also somehow healing. Like maybe something good could come from this awful experience after all. Richard looked at Gregory again. I want a new policy implemented across all our properties immediately. Every single staff member, from housekeeping to management, needs to go through training on respect, dignity, and the dangers of making assumptions based on appearance. I want real consequences for discrimination of any kind, and I want a system in place where guests can report mistreatment without fear of retaliation. Consider it done, sir, Gregory said, pulling out his phone to start taking notes. I'll have a proposal on your desk by tomorrow morning. Good. Richard turned to the younger receptionist who'd been watching everything with wide eyes. You, what's your name? The young man jumped slightly. David Martinez, sir. David, did you think something was wrong when Susan was treating my wife this way? David hesitated, clearly torn between honesty and self-preservation. Finally, he nodded. Yes, sir. Something felt off about the whole situation, but Susan is my supervisor and I'm still new here, and I didn't think it was my place to question her. It's always your place to question cruelty, Richard said, but his voice was gentler now. I understand the pressure of workplace hierarchy, but I'm making this clear right now, to you and to everyone else here. If you see someone being mistreated, you speak up. I don't care if it's your supervisor, your manager, or even me. You speak up. That's not just encouraged, it's required. Do you understand? Yes, sir, David said, standing a little straighter. I understand. Good. Richard looked around the lobby one more time. I think we're done here. My wife has had a very long day and she needs to rest. He started to guide Maria toward the elevators, but she stopped. Wait, she said. My things. They're still scattered around. Already taken care of, Mrs. Blackwood, Gregory said quickly. He gestured to two staff members who'd gathered everything into a neat pile. We'll have everything sent up to the penthouse immediately. Please let me escort you both upstairs. And again, I cannot apologize enough for what happened today. They rode the elevator in silence. Gregory looking like he wanted to say something but didn't quite dare. Richard still radiating barely controlled anger. And Maria just feeling exhausted down to her bones. When they reached the penthouse floor, Gregory unlocked the door to the suite with shaking hands. Is there anything else I can get you? He asked. Anything at all? Just make sure those policy changes happen, Richard said. And fast, absolutely, sir. You have my word. Gregory backed toward the door, then paused. Mrs. Blackwood, I know words aren't enough, but I truly am sorry. You deserved so much better than what happened today. Maria managed a tired smile. Thank you, Gregory. I appreciate that. When he left, closing the door softly behind him, Maria finally let herself collapse onto the plush sofa. The penthouse was beautiful, all floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the city, elegant furniture, fresh flowers everywhere. But she barely noticed any of it. She just felt drained. Richard sat down next to her and pulled her close. For a long moment, they just sat there in silence, holding each other. Then Maria started to cry again, but these were different tears. Not tears of humiliation or shock, but tears of release. All the emotion she'd been holding back came pouring out. I felt so small, she whispered against his chest, so worthless. Like I was nothing just because I didn't look like I belonged. You are not nothing, Richard said fiercely. You are everything. And what happened down there says nothing about you and everything about the people who treated you that way. I know, Maria said. In my head I know that. But it still hurts so much. I know, sweetheart. I know. Richard kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her nose, like he was trying to kiss away the hurt. I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you arrived. I'm so sorry you had to go through that alone. It's not your fault, Maria said. You couldn't have known. Maybe not. But I should have prepared better. I should have made sure every single person in every single hotel I own knew who you were and how to treat you. Maria pulled back to look at him. But that's the whole point, isn't it? People shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me with basic respect. They should treat everyone that way, regardless of who they're married to or what they're wearing. Richard was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. You're absolutely right. And that's what we're going to change. Over the next few hours, as Maria rested and recovered from her ordeal, Richard made phone calls, lots of them. She could hear him in the next room, his voice sometimes calm and businesslike, sometimes sharp with anger. He was calling every hotel manager in his chain. He was calling his executive team. He was calling lawyers and HR specialists. He was setting wheels in motion that would change how his entire company operated. When he finally came back to sit with her, he looked tired but determined. I've been thinking, he said. This can't just be about policy changes and training sessions. Those are important, but they're not enough. We need to fundamentally shift the culture. What do you have in mind? Maria asked. Several things. First, I'm implementing a secret shopper program, but instead of checking on service quality, we'll be checking specifically for discrimination and bias. People from all walks of life dressed in all different ways will visit our hotels and report on how they're treated. Maria nodded, liking where this was going. Second, I want to create a scholarship program for hospitality workers from underprivileged backgrounds, people who might not otherwise have access to careers in this industry, because diverse staff leads to better understanding and less prejudice. That's a great idea, Maria said warmly. Third, and this one is inspired by you, I want to start a program where families who couldn't normally afford it can stay at our hotels for free, maybe one suite per property, rotating basis, going to people who really need a break or a special experience. Because luxury shouldn't only be for the wealthy. Maria felt tears welling up again, but these were happy tears. You're going to call it the Everyone Belongs program, aren't you? Richard smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since he'd walked into that lobby. How did you know? Because that's exactly the kind of person you are. That's why I fell in love with you in the first place. Not because of the money or the hotels or any of that, but because you have a good heart. They sat together as the sun started to set, painting the city in shades of orange and pink. Maria's phone buzzed, then buzzed again. And again. She picked it up and saw that she had dozens of notifications. News alerts, social media mentions, messages from friends. Oh no, she said, scrolling through them. It's already online. Someone posted their video. Richard tensed beside her. What are they saying? Maria read through the posts, her eyes widening. Actually, they're on our side. People are outraged about how I was treated. They're praising you for firing Susan and the guards. Some are sharing their own stories about being discriminated against based on their appearance. She showed him her phone, and they scrolled through together. The video had already been viewed millions of times. News outlets were picking it up. People were debating, discussing, sharing their own experiences with prejudice and classism. This is going viral, Richard said, shaking his head in amazement. Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing, Maria said thoughtfully. If it starts a conversation. If it makes people think about how they treat others. If it leads to real change. Always looking for the silver lining, Richard said, pulling her close again. That's my Maria.